Welcome to Panels and Borders. I'm Dominic. So I found this article about Dune, and it's a little bit older one. It came out earlier in the month, and somehow it slipped underneath my radar. But in this article, the author is pretty critical and has strong doubts about the new Dune movie. So I thought I'd go through the article and just give my thoughts on what this person is saying about the film. Why the new Dune movie could be a disaster. Dune is destined to be another crashing bore because the actual characters in the story are not very relatable or likable. Okay, so I'm going to get back to that in a minute. True story. Years ago, even before dudes wanted a Dell, a gaggle of army generals gathered to ponder how to integrate computers into military operations. One prefaced his prognosticating by admitting to being a Trekkie, having grown up watching the 1960s TV series. He went on to talk about the future of warfare as though we would all be Captain Kirk's firing photon torpedoes from the command deck. Science fiction and the future have a messy relationship. Much science fiction either meditates on the present or mines the past. The technology may be mundane, taken from the pages of popular mechanics, or magical, casting aside the laws of physics. Since it's often not really about the future, using science fiction to plan the land of tomorrow is life imitating bad art. Yet, good science fiction, like all good fiction, can tell us much. We should not ignore the entire genre. Which brings us to the new film version of Frank Herbert's classic 1965 sci-fi novel Dune, slated to come out later this year. The sprawling story first hit the silver screen in 1984. It was a mind-numbingly bad adaptation. Then came two so-so miniseries, Dune 2000 and Children of Dune 2003. The latter is largely inaccessible to those who had not already read the books. Okay, I'm going to have to stop it right there and comment on that. So yes, the 1984 film isn't regarded as a very good adaptation of Dune, but over the years it has grown to have its own cult following, all of its own. As for the two miniseries, I see this a lot. This is a misconception that these were flops or something, the two miniseries. These weren't flops. Both these miniseries were smash hits for the Sci-Fi Channel back in the day. They had the highest rating of any miniseries on TV held that record for quite a while. Both Dune and Children of Dune, they were both big hits. They were not in any way, shape, or form flops or just so-so. They were very, very popular. I mean, they do have their critics, I'm not saying that, and there are people that don't like them, and they're not flawless by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm saying, just going by the numbers and the awards it's won and stuff like that, these were bona fide hits, both of these miniseries. And in my mind, these prove that Dune can be successfully translated to screen. So, moving on. Will Hollywood's latest try be a hit or a flop? Time will tell if it's the next Star Wars or just another Jupiter ascending. The makers of this Dune start with the serious advantage the original book sparked decades of writing by the author, his son, and a co-author. At last count, there are about 18 books on the Dune universe, spanning from when humans started to exploit space travel to their scattering to the ends of the universe. The original Dune book sandwiches somewhere in the middle of the story. Thus, the screenwriters start with the advantage of understanding the whole saga, being able to reflect and foreshadow on everything that's ever happened. This would be like George Lucas starting Star Wars knowing who Luke's father was. So this part of the article, I have to agree with this. That's something I've never actually thought about. When you compare what the filmmakers had to go by when Dune, the original Dune, came out in 1984, all the first 6 novels weren't even out yet. So there was still, I think, Heretics of Dune came out the same year, 84, and I believe the last book, Chapter House Dune, came out in 86. And there was none of the Brian Herbert stuff at that point. I mean, that was years down the road. So the universe has been much more fleshed out since that day. And on top of that, it's quite a bit different time. You got to take into account, too, that not only are there more novels, and it's been done a second time on screen with the miniseries, but there's also been very popular video games, since then, and and if you look at social media, I think fandom of Dune has been grown due to social media because of YouTube channels, people that love the book and talking about the lore of Dune, explaining Dune, like Quinn's ideas. Comic Book Girl 19, or I guess she goes by Danica X now is her new name. She's done Dune videos, analyzing these books. So this is all kind of like cultivating a fan base slowly over time, all of this stuff that people, when the 84 film came out, you probably only got into Dune through the book. Now there's a lot of people that got into Dune through the 84 film, and since then probably through the Brian Herbert books, through the miniseries, through one of the games. I have people who have no knowledge of Dune but got into Dune through the games, like Dune 2000, Dune stuff like that. They played that game, loved that game to death, and wanted to know what was this game based on, and then went out and sought out the books and stuff after. So that's an advantage, I think, that no one really thinks about when talking about the making of Dune now, as opposed to the early 80s. So I'm going to move on here. The history of Dune is particularly important. The past turns out to be a bit vital driving force in Herbert's version of science fiction. Technology is a bit player. There are no robots, no computers, and a lot of swordplay. That is because of a much earlier event called the Butlerian Jihad, when humans destroyed all thinking machines. No Terminators here. The lack of advanced weaponry significantly impacts the nature of governance and war in the Dune universe. Great houses compete for power using weapons of intrigue like spying, disinformation, diplomacy, double-dealing, assassination, and troops that look suspiciously like special forces. Contemporary audiences may relate more to Dune than Cold War audiences identified with the original novel. The interstellar politics of Dune feel a lot more like the geopolitics of our age of great power competition. The environment is also a key component of the Dune mythology. That too should resonate with our own debates over climate change. Now that's something that is true. Like, the environment is something that's hammered on way more today than it was talked about a lot even when I was a kid in the 80s, but it seems like even more today. So that's still a theme that resonates with audiences, that the environmental factors and how much more they're going to play that up than what was played up in the 1984 film. It was a theme in the 84 film, but it wasn't hugely out there. It wasn't like I don't really think the 84 film really did a good job hammering that home. And then it kind of ended with this weird ex Deus Machina thing where Paul just made it rain on the planet. And so anyway, so there's that. And but now, as for the politics of the day, Dune is kind of timeless when it comes to politics, because there's always going to be some kind of no matter what time period you're going in, there's always going to be great forces of power competing for some valuable resource. I mean, now it's oil. At one point in time, it would have been gold and silver. So that theme is timeless, or who's going to have the most dominant nuclear weapons or whatever, like in the 80s. That's always going to be that. It's timeless. So Dune can fit in any time period. So let's see what else he has to say. And like the world of Dune, everyone is fighting over the great substance that controls the universe. In Dune, it's called the spice melange, a drug necessary for space travel that is 1 billion times more powerful than opioids on steroids. In our world, it's data. The power that can collect, analyze, manipulate, and exploit the most data is on its way to becoming the master of our universe. That's kind of interesting. He compares spice to collection of data and doesn't compare it to oil, which I always thought of it as an analog to oil. Now this is where I disagree with him big time. Here is the big disconnect between us and Dune. Our future is inextricably intertwined with technology. Unless the screenwriters can figure out how to bridge that divide, Dune will be no more relatable than the dragons in the Game of Thrones. I don't understand where he's coming from with that. Is it now? From what I can tell, what he's trying to say is our lives are so intertwined with technology that we wouldn't be able to relate to a futuristic setting where their lives are not intertwined with technology, and technology is actually shunned and forbidden in a lot of cases. But I have to disagree. I think a lot of people today kind of see this as a negative that we're so intertwined with technology. So I think people will be able to relate just because we can see ourselves over time becoming more and more and more enslaved to technology than prior generations. There was even a motion to make the internet like a human right. So like internet access now is like getting the equivalent to like food, shelter, and water. They want it to be a human right. Um, so I don't really agree with the author, and I think a lot of people are aware that we are getting more and more dependent on technology, and people are more and more aware that we're starting to lose something because of it. Uh, we don't interact with people like they did in the past, and it's creating like weird shifts in culture with things that happen online and stuff like that. So it's very easy for us to see how we could go from our present state to being enslaved, to completely enslaved to technology, to someone, a group of people completely rejecting it or almost making it a taboo or a negative thing and then moving on beyond it. So I have to disagree. I think this actually makes the movie very relatable. And I mean, as far as like technology in movies, he's comparing it to Game of Thrones. Wasn't Game of Thrones like a huge, massive hit until like the last couple seasons? So I don't really get that. And then if we can't relate to a movie that doesn't have technology in it, how can movies that take place like Lord of the Rings have been a huge hit? There's no technology in that; it's all magic and stuff. So that makes no sense to me. Okay, moving on. In the real world, how we handle technology could dramatically impact the course of great power consumption. If those challenges are woven into the film, it might well provoke some serious thinking about our future, making the movie truly great science fiction. Otherwise, we'll have to hope its terrific special effects and music score equal to that John Williams produced for Star Wars, lacking that Dune is destined to be another crashing bore, because the actual characters in the story are not very relatable or likable. So, now I want to talk about the whole thing of how the characters are not relatable. Now, the main themes, and I don't even think the technology theme even factors in. And besides, it's not like they have zero technology in the world of Dune. They have actually higher technology than we have in a lot of ways. One, they have interstellar travel. They have the Holtzman engines, which is way more advanced than anything we have right now. They have body shields. They have las guns that can cut stuff up. We don't have anything like that. And they do have, in the other books, there are interstellar ships where they have like space battles and things like that. And then not only that, this is the other thing, this is not the, when people think about, so this is the thing that kind of annoys me about, when people think of progress and technology, they always think in terms of political progress and technological progress, but they never think in terms of mental or personal development progress. That's the thing, is no one ever thinks about the science of developing the mind. No one ever thinks about that. No one ever foresees that. And I think that is something that is kind of lacking. And it's something that I think people should be able to relate to strongly with Dune. And it goes back to the technology thing. Think about it like this. When you were a kid, okay, think if you're my age, I'm 42 years old. So if you're in my age bracket, you'll know exactly what I'm going to say. When you were a kid growing up, how many of your friends' phone numbers did you have memorized? Now, how many of your friends' phone numbers today do you have memorized? Probably, you might know your own phone number, and that's about it. And maybe one or two other people. That's it. When I was a kid, I had my home phone number memorized. I had all of my friends. I knew all their telephone numbers off by heart. I didn't have to flip through a Rolodex. I didn't have to look up my phone, nothing like that. Because you had nothing to write it down. You had to, if you were out somewhere and you were stuck, you couldn't just pull out your phone and automatically dial that number. You had to know it or you were screwed. If you wanted to ride home from your parents, you had to know your own phone number. And same thing, if you were spent a lot of time calling your friends or phoning them on the phone, you knew all their phone numbers off by heart. That's something, how many kids would know that today, would be able to memorize all their friends' phone numbers and phone them all off by heart? Not very many. So that just goes to show how advancements in technology is making our mind, like we're getting more advanced technological wise, but mentally we're getting more lazy. And that's the thing about Dune. I think it's going to make it it's a very fascinating subject, and people are going to be fascinated by the fact that at one point we got so lazy, we became enslaved with it, that there was a movement created to completely reject that technology and then devote all the sciences to developing the mind and not technology. So that's where you get to the point where Dune is. That's where you have these characters. As for characters not being relatable, I disagree with that. You have characters that are relatable. I mean, Duke Leto, he's a father figure. I think he's pretty relatable. And even Paul is, like, they're pretty relatable characters. And but not only are they, and if they're not relatable characters, they are very fascinating characters. I think you can be very fascinated by a character and not relate to the character at the same time. It's like watching a movie, or here's a good example. Like me and my girlfriend a little while ago watched the movie about Ted Bundy, and Zac Efron played him. Very, very fascinating person. Can you relate to him? No, not really, because I don't understand the motives of what would make a guy be like that, how he could have a girlfriend and a family and then turn around and go and murder women. Totally can't relate to that character at all. But very fascinating character, very interesting character to watch, and you want to know, well, what makes this guy tick? What's he all about? So relatability and likability is important, yes, but you can also get by on making a character fascinating or even charming or charismatic too, on top of that. And so there's a lot more going on in Dune than just a technology factor, just because people, well, it's a sci-fi movie, how come they don't have technology? Like, it's science fiction, yes, but it's kind of like the new wave science fiction, where in the old science fiction, how they resolved problems was was through more technology and more science to get around that problem. Where in new wave science fiction, it was some almost like magical route or some alternative route that wasn't science and wasn't more science or more technology. In the case of Dune, right? Where they don't get around the problems with more science and more technology. So interesting article. I mean, some interesting points, but I feel like a lot of people that criticize Dune, I honestly feel like they don't get it. And I don't want to sound pretentious when I say that, but that's how I honestly feel. I mean, he does make some, or they do make some good points in here in this article, and there's a few things I do agree with, but I think overall, and I mean, who knows? We don't know how this movie's going to land when it comes out in theaters, if it's going to be a big hit or it's going to be a flop. I mean, we're all hoping it's a hit, but in all honesty, I can't honestly say. I know it's got a lot going for it from what we know right now, and it'll be interesting to see what happens when the trailer comes out. When the trailer comes out, then you'll be able to get a better bead on it, how it's going to hit or how it's going to land with audiences once the trailer comes out and people react to the trailer. I think that'll give us a more of a gauge how this movie's going to work out. But still, an interesting article, and the very fact that he could write this article shows how fascinating Dune is, that you could pick it apart like that and even debate it. I mean, there's a lot of things you could. That's the thing about Dune. It brings up a lot of debate, brings up a lot of discussions, because it's deep and it's got a lot of themes on it, like human evolution, environmental themes, man's impact on the environment, and also how that environment impacts on him, and man's role with technology, of how it enslaves their mind and how you can free your mind by getting away from technology, all those sorts of things. So that's everything I got to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I will see you at the next one. Thank you to all of my subscribers, and thank you for watching this video. And if you're new to the channel, like, subscribe, and share. And don't forget to hit the bell icon for notification when new videos are uploaded.